Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aliens After Dark. Every night on this channel, I share alien and UFO encounter stories, told softly, to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Now, get comfortable, let your eyes close if they want to, and let's begin. Something pulled me over on a road with nothing else on it, and every time it did it a little better. My name's Nadine. I was 27 that autumn, and I was the roving patrol on the west side of the base on nights in November of 1989. I asked for that post. I want to say that first because of how the rest of it goes. If you have never been out there, the base is split in two by the interstate. Everything is on the east side: the offices, the barracks, the town, the water. The west side is where they teach and where they shoot and where they send people to get lost on purpose. It is enormous. I am not exaggerating when I say it would take you 2, maybe 3 hours to drive the whole of it, and that is if you knew the roads and did not stop. Most of it is woods, second growth over top of things that used to be something else. There are training areas out there from the war that nobody has used since, with concrete pads in them and pipe sticking out of the ground. There are old family graveyards from the farms, from before the base was the base, sitting inside little iron fences 20 feet off the road. They mow around them twice a year. You go by 4 or 5 of them on a normal shift, and after a while you stop seeing them. I asked for the roving unit because it was quiet, and because it gave me somewhere to be for 10 hours with nobody looking over my shoulder. That is the honest reason. I also hunted, and I would use the slow part of a shift to look at ground, so I would know where to sit on my days off. Everybody did some version of that. Mine was deer. The other thing about the west side is the radio. The repeaters do not reach out there. Past a certain point, you have a microphone in your hand, and it is a piece of plastic. There is one hill about halfway up where you can catch dispatch if you park in the right spot and hold your mouth right, and I would do my hourly check from there. If I missed 1, nobody thought anything of it. If I missed 2, somebody might start looking at a map. That was the arrangement, and I was fine with it. I need you to understand what kind of officer I was, because otherwise this sounds like a story about a nervous girl in the woods. I had run something like 400 traffic stops by then. I can still recite the approach. You offset your vehicle about 9 feet to the left of theirs, so that your engine block is between you and anything coming up the road behind you. High beams on. Take-down lights on. Spotlight into their mirror so the driver cannot see anything but light and cannot see your hands at all. Then you walk up on the driver's side and you stop just behind the door pillar. Not level with the window. Behind it. So you are looking down into the car and they have to turn around to look at you. I could do that in my sleep. I probably did, some nights. I had one other habit, which I picked up from an old sergeant in my first year, and which nobody does anymore. On the way up the side of the car, you tap the tail light twice with 2 fingers. It puts your prints on the vehicle, so if anything happens to you, there is a record that you touched it. It is a small thing. Most people my age thought it was superstition. I did it every single time, and I still do it. On a county road, in a Ford I bought myself. Now, the first night was around the 8th or 9th of November. I had finished posting people out on the gates and I was headed up to a training area at the top end, which meant 30 minutes on one road and about 15 on the next, and then a long dirt road that cuts that whole part of the base in half. I was maybe 2 miles up the dirt when headlights came up behind me. That in itself was nothing. Not common, but not nothing. There are civilian contractors, there are the range people, There are officers doing land navigation who have got themselves onto a road and are pretending that was the plan. So I slowed and pulled a little right to let them by, and they did not go by. They stopped. Dead center of the road, about 40 yards back. High beams only, no offset, no takedown lights, no spot. I sat there. I would like to tell you I did something clever. I put my window down 2 inches and I listened, and after about a minute I put it back up. Nothing came out of the vehicle. Nothing moved. After maybe 3 minutes, the lights just went off, all at once, the way you turn a key. I drove on. I wrote it down as somebody lost, and I meant it. People get lost out there constantly. That is more or less the point of the place. 4 nights later, same road, a little further up. Lights behind me again, this time they offset. I remember thinking, well, at least this one has some sense, and then I registered that they had offset to the right, which is the wrong side. You do not put yourself in the ditch and out from behind your own engine. Nobody teaches that anywhere. They were closer, too. 20 yards, give or take. And there was a spotlight, which there had not been the first time, but it was aimed at my trunk. Just low, just wrong, lighting up the back of my vehicle and nothing else. I picked up the microphone and I called it in, and I got what I expected, which was that soft hissing you get when the radio is on and there is nobody at the other end of it for 11 miles. I sat for 4 or 5 minutes, then the lights went off, and I went on with my night, and that was when I started to feel something about it, although I could not have told you what. The third time was the following week. Correct offset, left side, 9 feet or as near as makes no difference on a road that narrow. Correct distance behind me, about 15 yards, which is where you want to be. Takedown lights on. And the spotlight was dead in my driver's side mirror, at exactly the right height, so that I could not see one single thing behind it, and my own eyes were useless for anything past my hands. That is a very particular sensation. I had done it to a few hundred people. I had never had it done to me. It held there for 4 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when it started and I looked at it when it ended. And then the lights went off in sequence. Takedown first, spotlight second, headlights last. Which is the order you do it in, when you are done and you're getting back in your car and you do not want to blind the person you just stopped. I want to say something about the sound, because there is not any. In 3 weeks I never heard an engine, not once, not idling, not turning over, not pulling away. There is a noise a vehicle makes on a dirt road even at a crawl, the gravel under the tires, and there was none of that either. The lights came, and they held, and they went, and the road stayed exactly as quiet as it had been before they got there. There's a thing about eyes at night that I had known since I was a child, and I want to put it here because it is the only test I had, and I could not run it. A deer's eyes come back green in a light. A person's come back red or orange or nothing at all, depending on the light and the angle and how tired they are. It is the first thing you look for. It is how you know, in about a quarter of a second, whether the shape at the edge of a field is a doe or a man standing in a field at 2 in the morning. Every one of those nights I was looking into a light instead of holding one, and I never got to look at anything and find out which it was. The deer did not care, that is the other thing. There were 4 of them in the cut on the last night, right at the edge, in the wash of all that light, and they stood there chewing and looking at nothing in particular. I used to check them the way you check a gauge. Deer will tell you if a person is walking anywhere near them. Those deer told me nothing at all, every time, and after a while that bothered me more than the lights did. I stopped leaving my window down. That was the first thing I gave up. You run a window down 2 inches on a slow night so you can hear, and every officer I have ever known does it. And after the second time I ran mine up, and I have not driven with a window cracked at night since. I also stopped doing the thing where I would take my thermos out and sit at the graveyard on the ridge for 10 minutes. There is one up there behind an iron fence with 6 stones in it, and one of them is a child's. And I used to sit on my hood beside it, because it was peaceful and because somebody ought to. I lost the cap off that thermos out there in November, and I never did find it. That is not part of the story. It is just the kind of thing I remember about that month. Somewhere in the middle of that stretch, I talked myself out of it. I decided it was a truck from the schoolhouse with a bad alternator, running its own lights in some order that made sense if you were fighting a dying battery, driven by a candidate who had no business on that road and did not want to be found there. I was quite pleased with that. I wrote a note in my book to ask the operations chief about it in the morning, and then I did not ask him, because it was the kind of question that makes you sound like you have too much time. And then there were 3 quiet nights in a row. Nothing behind me at all. I stopped watching the mirror. I want that on the record too, because it means when it happened I was not sitting there wound up and waiting. The last night was a Thursday, and it was cold, and there was frost coming up on the leaves in the low spots. The lights came up behind me on the dirt about a mile short of the training area. 9 feet left, 15 yards, takedowns. Spot in my mirror at the right height, so that the inside of my vehicle went white and everything outside of it went away. And then I heard the gravel. Boots. Coming up the driver's side. Not fast, not slow. That specific, unhurried walk you use on an approach, which you are taught. Because you do not want to look nervous, and you do not want to look like you are in a hurry. 6 or 7 steps. And then they stopped, just behind my door pillar. Exactly where I would have stopped. In the one place beside a car where the person inside it has to turn their whole body around to see you. I did not turn around. I want to be truthful about this because people always ask me why I did not draw, and the answer is that I did put my hand on it, and I could not think of one thing to point it at. There was nothing there. There was a light and a sound, and my window was up and my hand was on my weapon, and I was 27 years old, and I sat perfectly still. The light lay across my hands. That is what I remember. Not the road, not the mirror. My hands on the wheel, lit up like a table under a lamp. I could see the grain of my own knuckles. I could see the little scar on my thumb from a stove door when I was 9. My notebook was open on my knee, and I could read my own handwriting on it, which I could not have done off my dash lights in 100 years. I could read my watch. I did read it. It was 2 minutes past 3 in the morning. And I sat there for about 40 seconds, which happens to be about how long I used to take, standing at somebody's window with their license in my hand, deciding whether I was going to write them or not. Then the light went off. Takedowns first, spot second, headlights last. I sat in my own dash glow with my ears ringing from the quiet, and I did not move for a while. When I did move, I drove out. Not fast. I have thought about that, and I think if I had run, I would have had to admit to myself what I was running from, and I was not ready to do that at 3 in the morning by myself. I did the rest of the shift in a lit parking lot on the other side of the interstate. I did not write it up. The next afternoon I went back out there in daylight, which I would like to say took courage, but it did not, because daylight out there is just woods and it is beautiful and you feel foolish. I found the place easily enough. I found my own tire tracks where I had sat, and 9 feet off the crown of the road, behind and to the left, there was a rectangle of gravel pressed flat. Not disturbed, pressed, the way ground goes under weight, with the little stones bedded down into it and the surface gone smooth. It was dry. I want to be careful how I say this. Everything else out there was wet. It had frosted and then come off, the way it does, and the leaves were soaked, and the road was dark with it, and there was dew standing on my own hood while I was looking. That rectangle was dry all the way through. I put my hand flat on it. It was cold, and it was dry, and it was the only dry thing in that whole section of the world. I got the tape measure out of my kit, and I measured off the crown, because I am the kind of person who does that. 9 feet and about 4 inches, and then I walked back to my own vehicle, and on the way past the back of it I saw 2 fingerprints in the road, grime on the tail light. They were at the height of my hand. 2 of them, side by side, clean, the way 2 fingers leave a mark when somebody taps a car twice on their way up the driver's side. I have never told anybody that part in the same conversation as the rest of it. It sounds like a flourish. It is not a flourish. It is the reason I stopped working nights. I got out about 1.5 years after that. I drive a road for the county now, in a different state, and I like it, and I have a husband who thinks I am the calmest person he has ever met. When I pull onto a shoulder, I offset 9 feet. I do not decide to do it, it is just where the car goes. He has asked me about it, and I told him it was training. And that is true as far as it goes. I check both side mirrors before I ever look at the rear view. Both of them, every time. And if a set of lights ever comes up behind me and holds there, I will sit still with my hands where I can see them for about 40 seconds. Because that is how long it used to take me. And then I will put it in gear and drive on, and I will not look, and so far that has always been enough. Somebody walked my course 12 nights in a row, and every night they walked it better, until the night they walked it exactly the way I walk it. I set that course and I kept it for 31 years, so I suppose I should say who I am. Otho Kesterson. My people farmed the bottom land in that county before there was a base on it. And when there was a base on it, I went to work for it. And one of the things they had me do was the Nightland Navigation course out west of the creek. This was February of 1974. If you have never seen one, it is not much to look at. 12 points spread over about 2 kilometers by 1. Each point is an engineering stake driven in the ground with an aluminum tag on it and a punch hanging off it on a wire. The punch has a shape to it, and every one of the 12 is different, and the candidate has a card, and when he finds the stake he punches his card. That way you cannot cheat. You have to walk your legs off to every one of them, in the dark, on a compass, and there is no other way to do it. The ground out there is thick, swampy in the low places even in winter, second growth over top of things that were something else once. There are concrete pads out in the middle of the woods from the 40s. There are old graveyards, colonial ones, behind signs that say to keep out, and candidates stumble into them constantly at 2 in the morning and it does them good. I did my work at night mostly, partly because that is when the course had to be right for. Partly because if you reset a point in daylight, somebody sees you do it, and then he knows where it is. So it was me, and a truck at the head of a road that no ambulance was ever going to come down in February, and about a 20-minute walk to the nearest light bulb. I did not think much about that at the time. I knew that ground better than I knew my own yard. I set every one of those stakes myself. I could find any of the 12 in the dark with no light at all, and I did it once in front of a lieutenant who did not believe me. And I have got to say that was one of the better evenings of my working life. I stamped those aluminum tags myself with a set of dies and a 2-pound hammer on the tailgate. The die for the 6 was bad and skipped, so every 6 on that course has a little gap in the top of it, and I never did get a new one. Point 9 has been in the same rotten poplar stump since 1961, because I have never been able to make myself move it. That is the sort of thing you carry around after 31 years. A course gets to be a person after a while. The other thing I had was the butts. Candidates smoke, and they smoke at a point, because finding one is a relief. So a stake with cigarette ends around it has had somebody at it, and a clean steak has not. And that is about as good a record as you're going to get out in the woods. There is one more thing you need, and then I will get on with it. Part of my job was tracking. When a candidate goes off the course and does not come back, they go looking, and what they want to know first is which way he actually went, not which way he says he was going. So, I carry a casting kit in the bed of the truck. Plaster, a mixing can, some card strips. You find a print, you box it, you pour it, and in 20 minutes you have got a boot in your hand. I had cast 100 of them, and every one of my own casts I could pick out of a stack blindfolded, because my left boot wears on the outside of the heel, always has. My daddy walked the same way. If you cast my print, you get a heel that is worn away on the outer corner and full on the inside, and it does not look like anybody else's. The first night I noticed anything was a Tuesday. I was servicing points, checking the punches, and at point 4 I saw the ground was pressed, right at the stake. A person's weight, both feet, square to the stake, the way you stand when you're working a punch with a card in your hand. It was clear as a photograph in that soft ground, which was fine. Candidates had been through. Except they had not, because there had been no night iteration that week, and I knew it, because I am the one who sets it up. So I went to the other points, and it was pressed at every one of them. All 12. Same weight, same square stance. And here is the part that made me stand there with my hands on my hips. The pressings were fresh, and I could tell the order by how the frost had come back over each one, and the order was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, straight up numeric, in order. Now, that is the mistake. That is the one thing every candidate does his first week and never does again, because walking those 12 in numeric order will carry you across that swamp 4 separate times and cost you 2 hours. Anybody who has been through it once knows to group them. So, I had somebody out there who had never done it before. Thursday, it changed. The order was different. Better. They were grouped by the high ground now, and 2 of the points had been picked up on the way back out, which is what you learn to do by the end of your first week. Same weight, same square stance at every stake. There was not one butt at any of them. Not that week, not any week after. Whoever it was did not smoke, which is a foolish thing to notice, and I noticed it anyway. I looked for the trail. I want to be plain about this, because it is the part I have never got past. There was not one. 12 places where a man stood, and nothing between them. Not a scuff, not a broken briar, not a track in the mud in the low ground where you cannot help but leave one. There is a deadfall between 6 and 7 that you have got to climb over, a big poplar, and there was frost on it, and the frost was not touched on either side on any night. 12 islands, that was all. A man standing in 12 places and never once walking anywhere. I saw 2 candidates the third night, way off at the far end, red lenses bobbing along, laughing at something. I nearly hollered. I do not know what I would have said. I watched them go up over the ridge, and I stood there with my thumbs in my belt, and it occurred to me that not one other person in the world was going to care about this. I took my dog out there with me most nights, Pete. Little rough-coated thing, hunted him on rabbits, and he had spent his whole life getting out of that truck before I did. The second week he would not get out. He would sit up on the seat and look through the windscreen at whatever was out there in front of the lights, and he would not come, and if I carried him down he went straight back and scratched at the door. So I quit bringing him. I told myself he was getting old. He was 6. The week after, the order changed again, and that was when I got angry, which was a relief. It was the instructor's route, the efficient one. There is a way to run those 12 that saves you about 40 minutes, and they do not print it on the card, because they want a man to work it out for himself. There were maybe 6 people alive who knew it, and I was one of them. So I decided it was one of the schoolhouse instructors walking my course at night to check my work, which would have been an insult, and I drove over there in the morning ready to have a conversation. Mr. Souter is the operations chief, and he is a decent man, and he told me nobody had been out on that course at night in a month. Told me twice. I did not believe him for a second, and I want you to understand what a comfort that was. I slept fine for 4 days on the strength of not believing him. There is a rule about lost candidates, which is that a lost man walks downhill every time. He does not mean to, he just does, because down is easier, and so when they get up a search, they start at the water and work back. I have found 9 men that way. I mention it because it is the only piece of tracking I know that has never once failed me, and because it means that in all those years, everything I ever looked for out there was found in the bottom of something, and I had never in my life had to think about a thing that did not go anywhere at all. The last night was cold enough that the plaster would not set right. I had come out to check point 12, which is nearest the road, and the ground at the stake was pressed the same as always, and I do not know why I decided to cast it. Contrariness, maybe. I had the kit in the truck, and I had the truck lights on it, and I had nothing else to do at 4 in the morning. I warmed the water in the heater vent because cold water and plaster do not get along. I boxed it and poured it, and I sat on the tailgate for near enough half an hour waiting on it. And I remember thinking that this was a foolish way for a grown man to spend a February night. Then I lifted it. It was a boot. My size, my pattern, the same commercial sole that half the county wore. And it was worn away on the outside of the heel, the left one. Worn exactly the way mine wear, that little crescent gone off the outer corner and the inside of the heel full and square. I was at home that night. I had been at home the night before that. I had not put a foot within 100 yards of point 12 in 9 days, and in those 9 days it had rained hard twice, and that cast came up sharp-edged and clean with the lugs on it clear enough to count. I had also, and I only worked this out driving home, changed the order that week. The pressings were not the instructor's route anymore. They were mine. Mine starts at 12 because 12 is closest to where I park, and it ends at 1 because 1 is on the way out to the road, and nobody in this world had any reason to know that but me. I put the cast in the truck. I scratched a 12 into the back of it with a nail, because that is how I labeled every one of them, and I did not report it, and I did not tell a soul for 11 years. It is in my son's garage now, wrapped up in a feed sack. He knows it is there. He does not know what it is, and he has never asked, and he is 52 years old, so I expect he never will. They moved that course twice since I retired, and I could not tell you where it runs now. I still walk in the woods, most days that my knees will have it. And I walk them clockwise. Always clockwise. Every woods, anywhere, and never in the order that anybody's card or map or list gives me. When my son asks why, I tell him it is easier on my knees going that way around a hill, and that is true. It is just not the reason. It learned my calls one at a time over about 7 weeks, and the last thing it learned was my truck. Bureaucratic. I was a game warden for 14 years, 9 of them on that base, and the autumn I am talking about is October of 1981. I ran the deer management program on the west side, which meant stands and counts and a check station, and a great deal of sitting still in the dark. The check station was a plywood shed with a scale hung off a locust pole and a light on a cord, and it sat at the top of a cut in the middle of the old training areas. Old is the word. There were pads out there and pipe and roads that stopped for no reason at all. The base was using none of it. The deer were using all of it. October out there is loud. Acorns come down on a metal roof like somebody throwing gravel at you. and the whole woods is rattling and dropping and running until about 10 o'clock, and then it goes quiet the way a room goes quiet. I worked that whole side by myself on the counting nights. There was no radio in the shed. The handheld would not talk out of that cut to save your life. The gate I came through locked itself at midnight, and there was one other key to it, and it was in my pocket. I never minded that. I have never in my life minded being by myself in the woods, and I think that is going to matter to you later on. There was a wasp nest in the eave of that shed the whole time I worked out of it, and not one person ever knocked it down. That is the kind of arrangement you get to out there. You leave things alone, and they leave you alone, and the tag book gets filled out in the light on the cord, and the carbon never lines up right. So the second copy always says something a little different than the first, and you hang a deer off the locust pole and the pole creaks. And that is the job. I got the job in 1967, and I spent the first 2 years being called ma'am in a way that was not a courtesy. I mention it because I learned early that if I said a thing out loud, it had better be a thing I could stand behind for the rest of my career. That habit is why I did not tell anybody about any of this until my 60s. I will be honest with you about what I am. I can tell a doe grunt from a buck grunt with a wind blowing. I have had every noise in creation reported to me as a monster, and I have stood in somebody's yard and explained most of them to their face, and I have been right nearly every time. A fox screaming, a barred owl, a bobcat, which will take the hair off your arms if you have never heard one. 2 limbs rubbing. I was the person you called when you heard something, and I liked being that person. For the counts, I used a grunt tube. It is a piece of tube with a rubber band over the end of it, and you blow through it, and it makes the sound a buck makes, and a deer that hears it will move, and if it moves past a stand, I can count it. I have a pattern I use. 3 notes, short, short, long, with a little break before the long one. It is not out of any book. It is mine, and I had used it since I was in my 20s. I also had a truck with a bad starter. The Bendix dragged on the 3rd revolution. You would turn the key and it would go and go, and on the 3rd one it would hang up for about half a second and then catch. Everybody at the conservation branch knew my truck by that sound. I could pick it out at a quarter of a mile. Early in October, I was on a stand at the north end of the big cut, and I blew the tube, and something answered me. From across the cut, maybe 100 and some yards, and it was wrong. The idea was right, but the throat was wrong, and it ran the note too long, and there was no break in it. It sounded like somebody blowing into a jug. What I thought was, there is a man in here with a call he bought at a hardware store, and he has no business being in here, and I am going to find him. I was properly angry about it, which is a good, clean way to feel. A week later, I did it again, and it answered again, and the break was in it. 3 notes. Short, short, long, with the break before the long. Mine. I did not blow that tube again, that season or any season since. I want to say what did not happen, because it is most of the story, and nothing ever moved. Not one time in 7 weeks. Brush does not stay quiet. A man in the woods breaks something, or slides on the leaves, or leans on a sapling and lets it come back. A deer will do all 3. Every sound I heard came at me out of open ground that I was looking straight at, with a light on it, and the broom sedge stood there and did not so much as lean. There was a great horned owl in that block that had answered me for 9 years. I would give him 2 hoots off the tailgate when I came in, and he would give me 5 back, most nights, from somewhere up on the ridge. It was a foolish little thing between the 2 of us, and I looked forward to it. He answered me the first week of that October. He did not answer me again that year or ever, and I do not know what became of him, and I do not think about it if I can help it. I had another habit like that. I used to click my light on and off twice when I came into the cut. Twice, just to say I was there. To nothing in particular. I quit doing that around the middle of the month. So, I set a night to catch him. Parked the truck 1.5 miles out at the gate, walked in the long way in the dark, sat 4 hours in the cold with a good light and my citation book on my knee and every intention of ruining a man's evening. Nothing happened at all, not a sound. I walked out at 2 a.m, almost disappointed, and I went home and slept like a stone, and I have thought since that I slept better that night than I had any right to. Somewhere in there I made my peace with it, or I thought I had. I decided it was a man from Dumfries with a catalog and a lot of free time, and that he was better at woodcraft than I had given him credit for, and that sooner or later he would get careless and I would have him. I even had a name picked out for him in my head, which I am not going to repeat because it was unkind and he never existed. That is the thing about being the person everybody calls. You get very good at finding the ordinary answer. You get so good at it that you will hold on to one long after it has stopped holding any weight, because the alternative is to be the sort of person who calls somebody else. The third week it rattled. Rattling is antlers. You take a pair of sheds and you knock them together and you roll them, and it sounds like 2 bucks fighting, and it will bring one in from a long way off. I have a way I do it. You crash them and you grind, and at the end of it you do a little tick and a drag, which I learned off an old man in Haywood County when I was 22 years old. It came from the middle of the cut in the open, where I had a light on it. Crash, grind, tick, and the drag. There was nothing standing there, broom sedge and stumps and the moon on it, and a sound that I have made with my own 2 hands for 20 years. I stayed till daylight. I did not sleep well that time. A cut smells sweet after the first frost, dusty and sweet, like the inside of a hay barn. I want to put that in because everything else I am telling you is cold, and it was not cold out there, it was lovely, and I loved being in it, and I want somebody to know that before I finish. The last night was the end of October, and I had the stand at the south end, and the wind was out of the north, and there were a doe and 2 fawns feeding out in the cut about 40 yards from me the whole evening. At around 1 o'clock, out of the middle of that cut, 110 yards, my truck started. I want to give it to you the way it came, the starter turning. 1 revolution, 2, and then the third one, hanging up and dragging half a second, and then the catch, and then the engine coming up and settling down into an idle. And the note of it, which was not a clean note because my exhaust had a hole in it, and it had been there 2 months. I had my light on that ground. There was nothing there. There has never been anything there. And then it shut off. Not the way an engine dies, the way an engine stops when a person reaches over and turns a key. The doe never lifted her head. Neither did the fawns. They fed right through it, and they fed after it. And I sat up in that stand with my light in my hand, and watched 3 deer tell me that nothing whatsoever had happened. My truck was at the gate, 1.5 miles off. The key was in my coat pocket. When I finally got down there at first light, the hood was cold enough to lean on, and the hole in my muffler had been welded shut 9 days before. It had not made that sound since the 20th of the month. It had made it every day for 2 months before that. All through the time, something out there was listening to me come and go. I did not report any of it, and there was nobody I could have reported it to who would not have written something in a file about me. What I did was write the census, and the census for that block went to nothing. Not low, nothing. No deer counted in that cut for the rest of that season, and none the next year and none the year after, and Lomax, who signed off on the numbers, asked me twice in writing to account for it. I put down habitat change both times. There is no habitat change out there. There is nothing out there but woods and stumps and time. I retired a long while ago. I keep a garden now, and I still walk every day of my life. I do not shut the truck off in the woods anymore. I leave it running. I have had every argument there is about how that is a foolish thing to do, and I do not care. I have not blown a grunt tube since 1981, and I gave my antlers to a boy who wanted them, and I quit calling anything in, anything at all, because the only thing I ever called in came, and it took its time about it, and it got better and better at coming until there was nothing left for it to learn. A light spent 3 weeks learning to fly our pattern, and on the last night it flew the part of it that only we knew. Tolliver. Emery Tolliver. I was a crew chief on night maintenance at the air facility down on the river, and this was September of 1968, and I was 35 years old, and about as far from a man who sees things as you could put together out of spare parts. The field sat right on the Potomac. If you have never been down there, the river is wide at that point, a good mile of it, flat as a table on a still night, and the town off to the north with its little handful of lights. We had a mat, which is the concrete, and a row of birds picketed out on it with their blades tied down, and a hangar, and a ready room with a coffee pot in it that had a burned ring in the bottom and a sign about washing it that nobody ever obeyed. Night maintenance was 3 of us. Dunkel, who could sleep sitting upright in a folding chair with a magazine over his face, and Pomeroy, who was in the hangar most of the night with the grinder going, and me. The tower shut down at 10. From 10 in the evening until 6 in the morning, that field was mine, and the only thing I had that talked to anybody was a landline to a duty desk on the far side of the interstate, manned by a corporal who did not want the phone to ring. I had 11 years on airframes by then. I had run engines on the ground for 4,000 hours, which is a number that means nothing to most people, so I will put it another way. I could stand inside a closed building and tell you what a bird out on that mat was doing, and whether the man doing it knew his business. That March, I called out an approach as bad while it was happening, and it turned out to be bad, and a machine did not get broken because of it, and people remembered that about me. The thing you need to know is the pattern. There's a diagram taped up inside the ready room window, on the glass, so you can see it going in and coming out. It is the traffic pattern for that field. Left hand, which is standard. Pattern altitude, which is not, because of the town. And then the piece that makes it ours, which is the dogleg. Coming around on downwind instead of running straight along, you jog west, out over the water, and then come back in for final. It is a noise abatement thing. It keeps the downwind leg off the houses. It is written into a base order, and it is not on any chart that gets printed anywhere, and every transient pilot who has ever come into that field got it wrong the first time and complained about it. The second, and we would sit in the ready room and take bets on how long it would take a new man to fly it right. I had a habit of standing out at the approach end of the mat when I could. That is where you can hear a bad bearing on something coming in before anybody in the aircraft has any idea. It is not really a duty. It is a thing you do if you love the machines, and I did. Ruthie wrote me letters that year, even though we lived in the same house, because she said it was the only way to say anything to a man who worked nights, and I read them out on the mat, sitting on a toolbox because the light out there was better than the light in the ready room. I want that in here. It was a good year until the end of September, and I would not want anybody to think otherwise. There was a bird on the end of the row with a cracked chin bubble that we had been meaning to fix since June. Fog would come up off that river in about 11 minutes flat and be gone again in 5, and the picket chains would ring when the wind got up off the water, and at low tide you could smell the mud from inside the hangar. That was the whole of my world from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, and I knew every sound in it. The first night was a Tuesday, and I will be honest, I hardly thought about it. A light came around the field. Just a light, white, no red and no green on it that I could see, going around the outside, and it was flying a right-hand pattern, which is backwards for us, and it was too high and much too fast, and it did not descend anywhere it ought to have. It went around twice and it went away over the trees. I called the duty desk and asked what was flying, and the corporal put me on hold for a while and came back and said there was nothing airborne within 40 miles of us, which is the kind of answer you get at midnight. I wrote nothing down. Later, that same week, it came back and it was flying left hand. Still high, wide on the downwind, way out over the trees, and the turn to base came late, which is exactly what a student does, because a student is always afraid of turning too soon and ending up short. I have watched 100 students do it. I stood on the mat with a rag in my hand, and I watched a light do it, and I felt something go over the back of my neck that I did not have a name for. Here is what was not there. There was no sound, none. A machine goes over you at 400 feet and you feel it in your chest before you hear it, and there is a beat to it, and the air changes, and everything loose on the mat moves. There was nothing. Not a whisper, and the tie-down pennants on the picketed birds hung dead straight down the whole time. Every time, every night. After the second week, I stopped watching the light and started watching the pennants, because the light made me feel unwell and the pennants I could stand. Dunkel slept through all of it. Every night. I could hear Pomeroy's grinder going in the hangar, on and off, on and off. I never woke either one of them. Not one time. I have gone around and around on that. The best I can do is that waking a man up would have made it a thing that was happening, and as long as it was only me out there, it was still something I could decide about in the morning. I do not think that is a good answer. It is the one I have got. Around the middle of it, I made myself comfortable with an explanation. There is a field across the river on the Maryland side, and I decided it was somebody out of there doing night work with an odd light configuration, and the water was doing something to the sound. I telephoned over there one afternoon and got a very pleasant man who said it was possible. They did fly some nights. He could not say for certain. I hung that phone up feeling like a new man. I had 9 good days on the back of that call, and I slept every one of them. The second week it started flying it properly. Pattern altitude, right where the diagram says. Correct width on the downwind, not wandering out over the trees. And the turn to base coming right over the second bend in the road, which is the reference we all used, and which is not marked as anything. It is just what the old hands tell the new ones. A mechanic on nights does not sleep like other people. You get it 20 minutes at a time, sitting up, and you come out of it clean at a wrong sound. And I had been doing it long enough that a wrong sound would have me on my feet before I had decided to stand. Every night that light came around, I was already standing. By then, I was going out at 2:10, which was about when it came, and standing at the approach end with my arms folded like a man waiting on a bus. The last night was the 26th of September, and it had rained hard in the afternoon, and there was still water standing in the low spots on the mat. It came around, and it was clean. Pattern altitude, correct width, base turn over the bend, and then, on the downwind, it jogged west, out over the water, off the town, and came back in on final and lined up on the approach end where I was standing. I have thought about the dogleg every day since. That routing is in a base order dated the previous March. It is a local order. It is not on a chart. It is not in the flight guide. It is not on any piece of paper that leaves that field. There were 2 copies of the diagram, one taped in the ready room window and one in the tower, and the tower had been locked since 10 o'clock, and the ready room window faces the mat. It came down the final, and it did not land exactly. It descended to the approach end, and it held a few feet up, the way a machine holds when it is settling into a hover and the pilot is being careful. And then it settled. The water on the mat went out from a center point in one ring. 1. A perfect circle running out across that concrete through every puddle in its way, the way water goes when something heavy sets down on it. And then the mat was flat again. I was standing about 40 feet from the middle of it. I had a flashlight in my right hand and I did not switch it on, and I have never been able to explain that either. My mouth was open. The pennants on all 7 birds behind me hung straight down. I do not know how long it stayed. Long enough that I got cold, and I was not cold before. Then the light was not there, and I did not see it go. In the morning, there was a circle of dry concrete at the approach end, about 20 feet across. Dry all the way through, in the middle of a mat that had dew on it from the fence line to the fuel pit. You could put your hand down and feel the edge of it. I stood there with a cup of coffee and I watched it, on and off, all morning, and it was still dry at 9, and at about 10 past 9 it went the same color as the rest of the concrete, and there was nothing to see. I never wrote it in the yellow sheet, and there's not a word about it in the maintenance log for that month. And both of those were my responsibility. I am an old man now, and I live about 2 miles from a small airport on purpose, because the sound of somebody flying a pattern is the most comforting noise there is in this world. I can lie in bed and hear a man turn base and know he has done it right. I still step outside at 10 past 2. Most nights it is nothing at all, and I stand there in the yard in my slippers, and then I go back in. If there is something up there, I do not look at it until it has gone by. I look at the trees to see whether they are moving. They always are. And then I go inside and I do not think about it again until the next night. I found 6 hides that summer, and each one was built better than the one before it, and I found the 7th by sitting down in it. I ought to say what I was, best drown, and I did maintenance for the park that shares a boundary with the base, and part of my job was walking that boundary, 9 miles of it. Once a week, one man, because there was no money for 2. This was June of 1977. That country is second-growth hardwood with laurel down in the draws, and it is thick. There are footings out there from camps that were built in the 40s and let go after, concrete pads with pipe stubs coming up out of them, and steps that go up to nothing. The boundary itself is a line of blazes on trees, and a rusted sign every so often, and half of it you would not find if you had not walked it before. It is 9 miles in, and 9 miles is the whole day. My truck sat at one end, and my lunch sat in a bag at the other end. And in between, there was nobody. The park radio worked from exactly 2 high points on that stretch and did not work anywhere else, and I have got to tell you it never once bothered me. I was raised in a parish in Louisiana where a man walked into the woods and came out when he was finished, and I never gave it a thought. Now, 12 years I had that job, and 4 before it on a timber crew, and my whole working life has been reading what people leave behind. Poachers mostly, boys with beer, a man once who was growing something in a draw. 300 hides I've taken apart with my hands, and I will put it this way. I had never been fooled by a good one. That is the sentence I had to take back, and I've had 40 years to think about how to say it. Here is how you find them. You count stumps. A hide is made out of sticks, and sticks come off of something. A man cuts what is handy, and where he cuts it leaves a stump, and a stump tells you more than a boot print ever will. The angle of the cut. How many strokes? Whether he cut toward himself, which most men do, or away, which the ones who know better do. And in June, a green cut goes brown in about a day. So, a pale stump is last night, and a brown one is last week, and there is your clock, and I have never needed another one. The other half of that job is the blazes themselves. I carried a quart of paint and a 2-inch brush in my pack, and I freshened them as I went. And there's a spring about 6 miles along with a tin cup hanging on a nail over it. And that cup was there before I started, and I expect it is there now. I would drink out of it every trip. On a weekday, you can hear the ranges going away off to the west, a long way off, like somebody moving furniture upstairs. On a Sunday, there is nothing at all, and the quiet is a different quiet. I had a dog then. Bird. She's dead now, long since. She walked that boundary with me every week of her life, and she would go up any draw in that country except the one, after about the third week, and she would stand at the bottom of it and look at me and wait. I never made her. I thought at the time she had got into something up there, a nest of something, and I let her have her way about it. The first hide I found was the first week of June, 20 yards off the blazes. It was a poor thing, built on the near side of an opening, so that anything sitting in it had the light behind it and would show up like a man in a doorway. Cut green and cut that same morning, and by the time I got to it, the leaves had wilted yellow, so you could see it from 100 feet. The spoil, which is the bits you cut off and do not use, was left in a pile right beside it. I took it apart and scattered it, which is what we do, and I made a note, and I went on. It happens 6 or 8 times a summer. The next week there was another one, a half-mile north, and it was better. Backlight avoided this time. Built on the far side of the opening so a man in it would be looking out of the dark into the light, which is right. The material had been carried in from further off, because there was nothing cut anywhere near it. The spoil was still in a pile, but it had been pushed under a log. I took that one apart too, and I went looking for the stumps. I want to slow down here because this is the part I go back over. I never found a single stump. Not for that one, not for the 4 after it. 9 miles of boundary, and I went a half-mile either side of it deliberately, quartering, the way you do, and I gave up 2 whole days of other work to it. There was not one green cut on that ground. Not fresh, not browning, not old and gray. The sticks existed, and the place they had been cut from did not exist, and I checked that with my own eyes over 4 weeks, and I would say it to anybody's face. The 3rd week's hide would have gone right past me, cut from the far side of the ridge, so there was nothing near it. Materials dulled, the pale faces rubbed with dirt, the spoils scattered wide and stamped down into the leaf litter. It was a professional piece of work, and I only found it because by then I was hunting for it, and I stood there a long while with my hand on the wall of it, feeling something I did not much care for. I will tell you what I told myself. A man who is that careful about backlight and spoil is a man who has been in the service, and there is a base right there full of them, and some of them hunt, and one of them had got a taste for building. That held together. It held together for about 10 days. So I did what a man does. I set up to catch him. 3 nights I sat out there, up above the draw, cold coffee, no light, boots wet, not moving. 3 nights and nobody came, and on the 3rd night I decided I'd put him off, and that was that. I went home and told Miss Ivy I had run a poacher off the boundary, and she was proud of me, and we had a good week. That was the last easy week I had out there. The 5th week I found another one, and it was better again, and while I was standing beside it there were about 20 schoolchildren on the park trail a 1/4 mile downhill from me. I could hear every one of them, shrieking, laughing, some woman telling them to stay on the path. The most ordinary sound in the world going by underneath me while I stood there with my hand on the wall of a thing I could not account for. I did not take that one apart. I want to be honest about that, too. I looked at it and I left it. The 6th one I found on a Thursday, and I did not touch it either, and I did not put it in the log, and I went home early. The last week of June was hot, and I had come about 5 miles and I was ready to eat. There was a deadfall in a little flat spot up off the draw, a big trunk down with brush grown up around it, and I sat down against it with my back to it, and I got out my sandwich. And the shade was wrong. That is the only way I have ever been able to say it. It was noon, near enough, and the light coming down on my hands was broken up small and even, in a way that light does not come through a deadfall and brush. It comes through in pieces and patches, This was regular, so I looked up. There was a roof over me. Laurel, woven, not piled, not leaned. Woven, in and out, tight, the way you would weave a basket if the basket was 6 feet across, and it went out over my head and down the sides, and I was sitting in the middle of it. There was a slot cut in the front of it, about 4 inches, at the exact height of a seated man's eyes, which is where you put one, and it was facing back the way I had come up the draw. I did not get up. That is the part I have never been able to explain to anybody, including my wife, including myself. I sat there and I finished the sandwich, the whole thing. It took me a while, and the whole time I was looking at the inside of that wall from about 18 inches away. Every stick in it was cut with one stroke. One. Flat, clean, no chatter on it, no second bite. 400 sticks near enough, and not one of them cut twice. And every one of those cut ends was turned inward, facing me, which means that from anywhere outside that hide, from any angle at all, standing anywhere in those woods, there was not one pale cut face showing. Not one. I have taken 300 hides apart. Men do not do that. A man does not do that once by accident, let alone 400 times, because a man is building it from the outside in and he does not care what the inside looks like, and the pale ends are how I find them in the first place. There is another thing about laurel that I never got past. Nobody builds with it. It is a bad stick. It takes a set when it dries, and it will spring out of a weave and pull the whole side of a thing apart on you inside a week, and every man in those woods knows it, which is why every hide I ever took apart was made out of anything else. Whoever wove that one either did not know that, or did not need it to last more than the one afternoon. I took one stick out of the wall on my way out. Just one, and I have kept it. It has been in a coffee can in my shed for 40 years, and the cut face on it has never grayed. Wood grays. You leave a cut stick in a shed, and inside of a year, it is the color of a nickel. That face is as pale and as clean today as it was that afternoon, and I have shown it to 2 foresters. The first one said hardwood. The second one turned it over about 6 times, and said hardwood, and would not put a name to it, and gave it back to me and changed the subject. I went back the following week, and the 7th hide was gone. Not taken apart. Gone, and the ground under where it had stood was leaf litter like anywhere else, and I got down on my knees and went through it with my fingers, and there was nothing in it. No cut ends, no laurel, nothing pressed, and there was never an 8th one, that summer or any summer after, and I walked that boundary for another 17 years. I retired in '94. The can is on a shelf in the shed where I can see it when I go in for a rake. I still count stumps. Any woods, anywhere, on vacation. In my sister's backlot in Louisiana, my eyes go to the stumps and I count them and I read them and I cannot stop doing it. And I do not sit down in the woods. Not on a log, not on a rock, not for a minute. I eat standing up out there, and I have done for 40 years, and Miss Ivy has always thought it was on account of my back. Something ran my sweep on that river for 2 weeks, and got better at it every night, and on the last night it ran the leg I have never told one living soul about. Cleon rake straw. I ran the range safety boat off the fans down there, on the Potomac, and the summer I am telling about is July of 1963. Flat-bottomed boat, wooden with a flathead motor in it that I knew better than I know most people. The river is wide at that place, 1.5 miles of it near enough, and on a still night in July it lays there like a floor. There is heat lightning up over the Maryland side all summer, going and going, and it never comes any closer and it never makes a sound, and you get so you do not look at it. The job was simple enough to say. They shoot off the ranges out over the water. Before a night shoot, somebody has to run the water and see that there is nobody in it, and then somebody has to sit on it while they shoot, so that nobody comes in behind. That was me. There were marker buoys out on chains along the edge of the fan, and I knew every one of them by the sound the water made on the chain. 1 man, 2 miles of water, a radio that talked to the range tower and not one other thing on this earth. And the tower went off the air between shoots, and I would be out there with the set hissing at me for 2 hours at a time. There was no other traffic on that stretch at night, and the reason there was no other traffic was me. I was born on that river. My daddy crabbed it, and I crabbed it, and I oystered it in the winter as a young man, and I ran that safety boat 18 years. I can find the buoy line in a fog with the motor shut off, and I have had to twice, and both times I did it by the water talking on the chains. I ran crab pots off that boat when I was not supposed to, and I am past worrying about who knows it now. Now, here is the sweep, because you have got to have the sweep to understand it. You come down the fan line, then across the short way, so you cut the far edge, then back up the inside slow, so you can see anything sitting on the water without a light, then out. Down, across, back up, inside, out. That is the whole of it, and it is what I was taught and what everybody who did that job was taught. And then there is the other thing, which is not part of it. At the mouth of the creek, at the bottom end, I turn and run 1 extra leg across the mouth. Every time, every night, 18 years. It is not in the pattern. Nobody taught it to me, and nobody knows about it. My brother Emmett went in at that creek mouth in 1951, and they found his skiff, and I have never in my life said out loud why I run that leg. Not to my wife, not to the tower, not to a priest. It takes about 90 seconds. I run it and I go home. That flathead had a habit of loading up at idle, and I carried a spare plug in my shirt pocket every night of 18 years, and changed it out on the water more times than I could tell you, in the dark, by feel, with the boat going around under me. I could do it in under 2 minutes. I mention it because a man who can do that in the dark is not a man who is easily turned around by something on the water. The river smells one way before a storm and another way after. Before, it goes flat and sweet and a little like copper. After, it is mud and cut grass. In between, on those July nights, it does not smell like much of anything, and the air sits on you, and you can hear a truck change gear 2 miles off on the Maryland side. The first night was around the 8th of July, and it was flat calm. A wake came out of the dark ahead of me, going up the fan line. A good big wake, the kind a boat throws at speed. There was nothing at the head of it. There was no boat, no light, no sound of a motor, and I have thought about the sound part more than any of the rest of it. And it was running the fan line inside out, backwards, up the inside first, which is what a man would do if somebody had told him the words of the sweep and he had got the order wrong. And too fast, much too fast for the work. You cannot see a swimmer at that speed, and everybody knows it. I sat there with the motor at idle, and I let it go by out in front of me, and I did not follow it. A few nights later, it was back, and the direction was right, and it had slowed down. That is the one that took the wind out of me, if you want the truth. Not the speed exactly, the particular speed. There is a speed you run that sweep at, just off the plane, where the bow is down and you can see the water, and it is slower than any man would choose unless somebody had told him why. It had that speed. Now, what did not happen was the buoys. A wake that size lifts a marker buoy on its chain and rings it. Every time, I have heard that ring 10,000 nights of my life, and I could tell you the pitch of it. Through all of this, those buoys sat dead still on the water. The chains did not speak. Not one of them, not one night. I want to say a word about my brother, and then I will leave him out of it. Emmett was 2 years older than me, and he could swim like an otter, and that is not why he went in. They found the skiff up against the point with the oars still in her and everything in her dry. I would not take that skiff. My uncle offered her to me, and I would not have her in the yard, and he sold her to a man from Colonial Beach, and I have never asked what became of her. Toller was the tower man that summer, and he would come up on the set twice a night, cheerful, bored to death, asking me, was the water clear? And I would tell him the water is clear. It was clear. I never once lied to that man. And I have never been lonelier in my life than I was saying those 3 words into a microphone, with a wake running a pattern out in front of me. I got myself an answer around the middle of it, and it was a good one, and I was proud of it. There is a shoal down below, and there is the shipping channel further out, and I decided that a ship going up to Washington was throwing a wake that was coming across, bending on that shoal, and arriving at me looking like something it was not. I ran down there one afternoon in the daylight to look at that shoal, and I decided it would do it. I told myself so twice. 2 clean nights followed, and I was a happy man. I ran a pot line up in the shallows most of that summer while I was sitting on the water, which was against about 4 rules, and I pulled those pots every night of the 2 weeks I'm telling you about. They came up the way pots come up. Crabs in them, and the bait gone, and everything in the river carrying on exactly as it always had, which is another thing I have never been able to fit anywhere. The second week it ran the whole thing. Down the fan line, across, back up the inside slow, and out. In order, in the right places, with the corners in the right spots, and it slowed at the corners. That is the piece I would want somebody to explain to me. A boat has to slow at a corner because a boat has weight and a boat will slide. A wake does not have to slow at anything. There is no reason on God's river for a wake to come off the throttle going into a turn, and that thing came off the throttle going into every one of them. The last night was the 22nd of July. I had shut the motor off, and I was sitting in the lee of the point, drifting a little, with a smudge pot going in a coffee can for the mosquitoes, which were terrible that summer. It came down the fan line, across, back up the inside, slow, and out at the top. And then it came back down and ran across the mouth of that creek, one leg, at the slow speed, and turned out and went, and the river was a river again. I did not start the motor. I sat there in the dark until it got light, which is about 3 hours in July, and in that 3 hours nothing else happened at all. The tide ran. A heron went over. The heat lightning did what it does up over Maryland. I had my hand on the starter the whole time, and I never pulled it. There are 2 things about that wake that I have never got around. The first is that it crossed the current and it did not bend. A wake in a running tide skews. It has to. The water it is in is moving, and it goes with it, and every waterman alive knows what that looks like. That thing ran dead straight across a hard tide like the water under it was standing still, and there was nothing behind it. A wake has a train. It has the second wave and the third and the slop that comes after, and it comes back off the bank at you a minute later. There was one wave going, and behind it the water was flat. In the morning, I ran the buoy line before I came in, because I wanted something to do with my hands. Every chain was laying to the north, all 11 of them. And that tide had run south all night, hard, on a full moon, and I have never in my life seen a chain lay against a tide. And I sat there and looked at 11 of them doing it. And on the 4th buoy from the bottom, there was a bright band worn into a link. Clean metal, right through the paint, and I had painted that chain myself the week before with the orange they made us use. I am 90-something years old now, and I live where I can see the water, which is the only thing I ever asked for. I run that sweep in my head most nights before I go to sleep. Down the fan line, across, back up the inside, out. And when I get to the creek mouth, I say the extra leg out loud, just say it. I do not run it. I have not run it since that July, and I never will again. But I say it in the dark, in my own house, so that whatever was out there listening knows that I know it is not mine anymore. Somebody marked a full string of 10 in my pit that night, correctly, on a target that nobody had shot at. Georgie Slocum, pit boss on the rifle range, 600-yard line, and this was May of 1985, the week before the matches. I was 31, and I'd been on ranges for 9 years, and in the pit for 4 of them, and I want to say right at the start that I loved that job the way people love a boat. If you do not know what the pit is, it is a concrete trench dug in under the berm at the far end of a rifle range, below the level of the ground, and the targets live in it on carriers. A carrier is a frame on a counterweight, and you run it up over the top of the trench and down again by hand. The shooter is 600 yards away and cannot see anything but the target. The pit crew is underneath, in the concrete, doing the work. It is cool down there in any weather. It smells like wet concrete and paste and sandbags, and sound arrives in it wrong, sooner than it should, and from the wrong direction. And you get used to that in about a week and never think about it again. I was down there that night by myself doing inventory before match week, counting spotters, counting pastors, checking carriers, greasing what needed it. The gate at the top of the range road was locked, and I had walked down. The pit telephone is an old wooden thing with a crank on it, and it goes to the tower, and the tower had been dark since 5. Now, let me tell you how you mark a target, because the whole thing rests on it. The shot comes over. You hear it, and you feel it, and you cannot mistake it for anything, and I will come back to that. The shooter shoots, you bring the target down on the carrier, and you find the hole. You put a spotter in it from the back, which is a disc with a peg on it, and the peg goes in the hole, and the disc shows on the front. White side out if the shot is in the black side out if it is in the white, so the shooter can see it from 600 yards with a scope. Then you run the target back up, and then you take the marking disc, which is a disc on the end of a long stick, and you hold it up in a position that tells him the value of the shot. Overhead is a bull. Down and to the left is a 4. Every position means a number, and every shooter on that line knows them all better than his own telephone number. Then you take the disc down. Then the target comes down again. You paste over the old hole with a paster so the next shot is clean and up it goes. That is it. That is the whole job, and a good crew makes it look like a machine, and a bad crew gets shouted at from 600 yards away by a man with a bullhorn. There is a whole culture down in that trench that nobody above ground ever sees. There is one seat everybody wants, on the sandbags at the end where the light comes in. And there is a running argument about how thin the paste ought to be mixed. And there are rules about showing a light that everybody breaks. I carried a flashlight in my back pocket for 4 years against a rule I enforced on other people. And you learn to duck. Everybody does it the first week, every time a round goes over, and everybody is embarrassed about it, and it takes about 2 months to stop. I have watched a colonel duck. The point is that a body in a pit knows what a round sounds like at the level of the spine, and no amount of telling yourself otherwise will move it. The first night of inventory, a carrier ran up. Somewhere down the line to my right, maybe 8 or 9 frames away. Just up, all the way to the stop, and it hung there for a second and came down too fast and banged on the rail. Nothing marked, no spotter, no disc, nothing. I hollered. Nobody hollered back. I walked down there with my light, and the carrier was sitting at rest with the counterweight where it belonged, and I put my hand on the rope, and it was still. I decided it had crept. Carriers do creep if the counterweight is wrong. I made a note in the inventory book to service it. The second night, there were 2 of them. Both up, and on the second one there was a disc. It went up on the stick out of the holder, and it went up in a position, which is what stopped my heart, except that the position was wrong for anything. It was somewhere between a 3 and a 4, and it was held up about 4 times, as long as anybody would hold it. Then it came down. I want to say what was not there, because after a while, it was the only thing I could think about. There was no shooting. 600 yards of empty grass in front of me with the moon on it, and nothing on that firing line at all. And a rifle round coming over a pit is the loudest and most physical thing in a person's whole day. It cracks. It arrives before the report does. You feel it in the roof of your mouth. Nobody who has spent an hour in a pit could ever be confused about whether one has gone over, and in 3 nights not one did. The guard at the top of the range road had a lit window I could see the whole time. Half a mile up, a little yellow square. He never came down. His light went out at midnight, the way it did every night of the year, and after that I had the moon. I cranked that pit telephone twice on the second night. It has a crank on the side and 2 rings, and it goes to one place. And I stood there with the receiver against my ear listening to a phone ring in a dark building half a mile up a hill, which was exactly as useful as it sounds. On the 3rd day, I gave myself a very good afternoon. I decided it was a counterweight problem, that the frames were creeping, and that the disc business had been the stick sliding out of the holder as the frame moved. So I got the grease gun and I did every carrier on that line, all 22 of them, and I checked every counterweight and I whistled the whole time. I would like that hour back. It was the last good hour I had on that range. The 3rd night, a full string, target 6, up. A pause, about the right pause, down. Spotter placed. I could see the disc face on the front of it when it came back up. Up again, and the marking disc goes up on its stick, correct position, held for the right count, and down. Target down, paste, up, 10 times, 10 shots. Timed like a crew that knew what it was doing. Better timed than mine on a bad day, and I will say that out loud. I stood at the bottom of the pit with a grease gun in my hand and watched a target get marked for 10 rounds that did not exist. Match week is a strange week on a range. The teams come in from everywhere, and they all have their superstitions, and there are men who will not let anybody else paste their target, and men who want the same pit crew every year, and will ask for you by name. I was looking forward to it. I'd spent 2 weeks getting that pit right for people who were going to be happy in it, and I want that said somewhere. The last night was the Thursday. It started on target 11, which is near the middle, and I was maybe 40 feet away, and this time I knew the string. That is what got me moving. There is a pause in the middle of it, a long one, about a magazine change, and then 5 more. That is the old 300-yard rapid fire sequence. They wrote it out of the course in '79. It had not been shot on that range in 6 years, and there were maybe 4 people left on that installation who would have recognized it, and one of them was me, because my father shot it, which is the reason I took the job in the first place. So I walked down the pit while it was running. I am not proud of that. I do not know what I meant to do. I stood at a frame 11. The target was up, and the marking disc came up out of the holder beside my shoulder, on its stick, and went to the position for a 5 and held there. The stick was standing in its holder. There was nobody on it. There was nobody in that pit but me for 200 yards in either direction, and I had walked past every foot of it to get there. I put my hand out. I want to be truthful. I put my hand out about 6 inches, and then I stopped, and I did not touch it, and I stood there for the rest of the string with my arm half up like a fool. The disc came down. The target came down and it stopped at pasting height, which is where you stop it when you want it pasted, and it waited there. I pasted it. After a while, I do not know how long, I had the paste bucket at my hip on a strap the way you carry it, and I took a pastor off the spindle and I did what I've done 10,000 times. There were no holes in that target. The paper was whole. The face was clean, an old repaired face out of the stack, patched from other days, and there was not one hole in it from that night. And there were 10 spotters in it. In a group. A good group, about 8 inches at 600. The kind of group that would win something. 10 pegs standing in that paper, holding, with the discs showing on the front of them. Standing in paper that was not pierced. The way a pin stands up in water. I took that face off the frame, I rolled it up, and I carried it out under my arm at 2 a.m, past a locked gate, and I have it still. The holes are in it now. 10 of them in the group, made by the pegs coming out. And around every one of them the paper is not torn, it is pushed. The fibers are bent forward, and they are not broken, not one of them. And I have had 2 people who work with paper look at that and tell me that paper does not do that, and then hand it back to me the way you hand back somebody's baby. I never reported it. Mudge was the range officer, and he was a fine man, and there is no version of that conversation that ends with me still being the pit boss. I run a range in another state now, civilian. I am good at it, and my crew are good, and we do things properly. I pull every target face down at the end of a day, and I turn it over, and I look at the back of it before I rack it. Every face, every day, and it takes me an extra 40 minutes, and I do not skip it. Dela Cruz asked me once what I was checking for. I told him it was a quality thing. He is 24, and he likes working nights, and I am not going to be the one who takes that away from him. For 3 weeks, something learned to drill on that parade deck, and on the last night it got it perfect. Wyndham. Haskell Wyndham. I was 24 years old, and I was the barracks duty non-commissioned officer at Mainside, midnight to 6, and this was March of 1955. The parade deck is a rectangle of asphalt with lines painted on it, and it sat with the barracks along one side of it and the water off beyond. In March, it froze most nights. There would be frost coming up on it by about 3, and the fog would come off the river and up the bank and stop dead at the seawall every single night that spring, and never once come over it. I used to watch that and think about it. My whole job was the desk. There is a door, and inside the door there is a desk with a lamp on it and a logbook, and behind me, down the passageway, there were about 60 men asleep. You write an entry every hour whether anything has happened or not. You walk the passageway twice a watch. If a man comes in drunk, you deal with it and you write it down. If the building catches fire, you telephone a sergeant who does not want to hear from you. I did that for 11 months, and I wrote out every hour of it in that book. I have never once in my life made anything up in a logbook, and I would like that considered. I was not interested in ghosts. I want to be blunt about it. There were men in that barracks who talked about the deck at night, and I thought they were bored, and I said so, more than once, in a way that was not kind. The log had ruled columns, and there was a right way to fill them. Time on the left, entry on the right, and the entry had to be a sentence, and there was a phrasing for everything. All secure. Passageway inspected, nothing to report. You wrote nothing to report at 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the morning for 11 months, and it never once occurred to you that the book was a record of anything except that you had stayed awake. The building smelled of floor wax at that hour, the wax and the cold asphalt coming in under the door, and there was a bell on the quarterdeck that got struck at certain hours by tradition and by nobody in particular after about 2. Part of the job was waking men for early flights, which has an etiquette to it. You touch the frame of the rack, not the man. You say his name once, quietly, and you wait. A room full of sleeping men is a thing you learn to be careful with. 2 things I had at that desk that matter. The first is that I understood drill. Everybody did. You spend months of your young life being taken apart over it. The count, the cadence, the manual. And the thing about drill that people outside it do not know is that it is not a matter of opinion. A movement is either correct or it is not, and every man on the deck can hear which immediately without being told. 60 men putting a foot down at the same instant makes one sound. 60 men nearly doing it makes a different sound, and there is no mistaking the two. The second thing is that I had a tape recorder, a reel machine, which was not common then, and I had it because I taped the ball games off the radio to listen to on the long part of the watch. The microphone on it was poor, so you had to sit right up beside it, and I had a box of reels in the bottom drawer of that desk with dates written on them in pencil. The first night was early in March, feet on the deck. Out on the asphalt at about 2 a.m, a body of men marching, and out of step badly. Ragged. Heels landing all over the place, out the way a platoon sounds on its second day when half of them have never done it. I got up and went to the door. There is a window in the door, and then there is the door itself, and I opened it, and there was nothing out there. Frost coming up on the asphalt. Painted lines. The lamp on the corner of the building. The fog sitting against the seawall the way it always was. I wrote it in the log as noise on the deck. Investigated, negative, because that is the language you use, and I did not think about it again for a week. I wrote to Nita at that desk most nights on the ruled paper they issued, and I would put the letter in the drawer when I heard anything and take it back out after. There is a letter of mine from March of that year with a gap in the middle of a sentence, and I have never told her what the gap was. And she is gone now, so that is that. The following week it came back and it was better. Most of it in step, the tail of it dragging 3 or 4 men behind the beat, which is exactly what a platoon sounds like in its second week when the front rank has got it and the back rank has not. I stood in the doorway that time for a good while, and I did not open it any further. Now, here is what was not out there, and it is the only reason I could keep listening. There was no voice, none, no count, no command, nobody calling a cadence, nobody sounding off, no left, right, left. On a parade deck there is always a voice, and the voice is the whole point, and the voice is the thing that 128 feet are obeying. There were the feet, in time, obeying nothing at all. I have thought about that for 70 years. If there had been a voice, I would have gone out there, I am almost sure of it. A voice is a man, and a man can be walked up to. The silence is what kept me at that desk. The men slept through all of it. Every night, every one of them. I walked that passageway twice on the last night, and there were 60 men out cold, and one of them rolled over and said something about a bus, which I have never forgotten, and which was not about anything. Somewhere in the middle of it, I found a way to be comfortable. I decided it was a working party from another barracks crossing the deck early for a reveille formation, and I went and found the schedule and looked at it for a long time. And it fit, more or less, if you were willing to be very generous about the hour. And I was extremely willing. I got 4 days out of that schedule, and they were good days. The ball games were out of Baltimore, and they came in badly, with the static rolling up and down, and I taped them anyway. I had about a dozen reels of a man's voice describing something that had happened 6 hours earlier under a lot of noise. That is what the machine was for. That is the only reason there was a machine in that building at all, and I have thought about that more than is healthy. Those painted lines got repainted every spring by a working party with string and a 5-gallon can, and that year they did it the first week of April, about 10 days after all this, and I stood and watched them do it, and I could not tell you why. The third week it was in step. All of it, the whole formation, and they halted together. I want to explain what that means to somebody who has not done it. A halt is the hardest thing there is. It is 2 counts, and then everybody's foot is down at the same moment, and it takes a platoon months to be able to do it, and some of them never can. I heard that halt come down on frozen asphalt like one boot. I sat at that desk with my hands flat on the log, and I did not write anything for a while. The last night was the 24th of March. I got the recorder out of the drawer, and I threaded a reel, and I set it on the deck by the door, and I put the microphone up on the sill, and I opened the door about 8 inches and I sat back down. I did not go out. I have never made any excuse about that, and it ran the manual, not just marching. Movements, one after another, a proper sequence of them, executed clean and hard on the frozen ground, with the halts landing on one sound and the pauses between them the right length. And one of those movements was one I had learned as a recruit in 1949 and had not heard since because they took it out of the book in 51. I sat at that desk for 11 minutes and I wrote nothing in the log. That is the only gap in 11 months of my handwriting in that book. And if you found it now, you would see the hour before and the hour after and nothing in between. Then it halted the last time. And after the halt there was nothing at all, and the fog was at the seawall, and the deck was white with frost from one end to the other. I kept the tape. Years later, a long time later, I took it to a man named Rasmussen, who had been a drill instructor for 22 years, and was retired by then. I did not tell him what it was. I said, "Listen to this, and tell me what you hear." He listened to it twice, all the way through, and he did not say anything the first time. The second time he said 64. I asked him what he meant, and he said 64 men, in step. And then he said the thing at about 4 minutes in has not been in the manual since he was a young man, and it was done properly. And where did I get this? I told him a parade in Rhode Island. He looked at me for a while and he said he did not believe me. And then he let it go, the way men of that generation would, and we talked about something else and I never saw him again. It is a 7-inch reel with a date on it in pencil and nothing else. It has been copied twice onto other things since, and both copies have got the 11 minutes on them, and they sound the same as the original, which somebody told me once ought not to be taken for granted. I am very old. I sleep with a window open in every weather, in January, in a house in New England, and my daughter has given up saying anything about it. I do not have a reason for that. It just has to be open. The tape is in a drawer with my discharge and a photograph of Nita, who I married in 56 and buried in 2009. I have played it for maybe 5 people in my life. Never twice for the same one, and there is a reason for that. The first time, they listen. The second time is when they start asking me what I think it was, and I have never had an answer to that, not one. I have had 70 years, and I have got nothing to offer anybody, except that whatever was out on that asphalt was not there to frighten me, and I do not believe it ever knew I was in the building. It was working, that is all. 3 weeks, and it got better every week, and on the last night it got it right, and then it did not need to come back. Something down in that creek bottom spent a whole summer learning to whistle, and at the end of it, it whistled me a song I had never heard. My name is Ozella. I was 17 that summer, and I am 97 now, and the summer was 1946. I worked in the laundry on the base. It was a long, low building with steam standing in the windows all day, and a screen door on the back of it that never latched properly, not once in the 2 years I was there, and everybody who went out that door pulled it too, and it swung open again behind them. Mrs. Peavy ran it, and she sang hymns while she worked, and she was not good at it, and we were all very fond of her. The base was emptying out that year, the war was over, and the men were going home, and it seemed like every week there were fewer names coming through. We sewed names into collars and we took names out of collars, and after a while you knew the names better than the faces because you never saw the faces. My people farmed the ground that the base sits on. I was born about a mile from where I worked, in a house that is not there now, and there is a training area over the top of it. My daddy took the money, and he never got over it, and he never said so. I used to walk out that back door and know exactly where I was standing in relation to a kitchen that had been torn down. The work itself was hot, and it was the same every day, and I liked it more than I have liked most things since. There was a mangle at the far end that two of us fed together, and you learned very quickly to respect it. The whole building smelled of starch and bleach and steam, and when you walked out at the end of a shift, the outside air went through you like cold water. They paid us on a Friday, and the first pay I ever earned in my life I spent on a pair of shoes that were the wrong size, and I wore them anyway for 2 years, and I have never once bought a pair of shoes since without walking up and down in them first. I walked home along the creek because it was shorter. Down behind the laundry, the ground falls away into a bottom, old hardwood, and there's a path through it and a plank bridge with a nail sticking up that caught the hem of every dress I owned. 11 at night, on my own, 17 years old, and nobody in 1946 thought one thing about it, including me. There were fireflies down there like you would not believe. There were more of them then. I do not care what anybody says about that, there were. My grandmother taught me to whistle when I was 6 years old, out on the porch, and she told me not to do it in front of my mother because girls were not supposed to. There was a saying about it. A whistling girl and a crowing hen. My mother said it to me perhaps 400 times, and it never took, and my grandmother would catch my eye when she said it, and that is one of about 6 things I have left of her. The men that summer whistled one song. All of them, all summer, everywhere. You could not get away from it. I whistled it too, walking home because everybody did, and I will give you the first 4 bars of it, but I will not sing it, because I have a voice like a gate. Something in that bottom started answering me in June. Only it was not answering, not the first time. It made a sound that had the shape of the song in it and none of the notes, like somebody describing a tune to you instead of playing it. The rise and the fall were right, and every single note in it was wrong. I said out loud, "That is a bird." I remember saying it. There was nobody to say it to. By July, the notes were there, and they were in the wrong order. That is when I stopped on the path. I stood on that plank bridge with my hand on the rail, and I listened to something in the dark put the right notes in the wrong places, and I was not frightened. I want that understood, because everybody assumes I was, and I was not. Not one night that whole summer. Later in July, it had the order, flat. Badly flat, the whole way through, the way a boy sings when his voice is turning. But it was the tune, and it came after mine. I would whistle my 4 bars and stop, and it would give me 4 bars back, and then it would wait. It waited. That is the part I have carried. There would be a little space afterwards, and I would know, the way you know when somebody on a telephone has not hung up, that it was still there, and it was waiting to see what I would do. So, I would give it 4 more. Nothing was ever down there. I looked. I looked every night of that summer, and a creek bottom in Virginia in August is as full of nothing as anywhere on this earth. Leaves and water and dark. I never saw so much as a shape. Lucille walked home with me twice that summer, and she heard it both times, and she said mockingbird, and she was satisfied with that for the rest of her life. She died in 2004, and I never brought it up again after those 2 nights. I do not know why. I think I did not want it explained. By August, it was in tune, and it stopped waiting for me. That is the thing that changed. One night, in the middle of the month, it went first. I came down onto the path, and it was already going, all the way through, in tune, and it finished. And then it left the space, and I whistled it back, and I got it a little wrong. I laughed out loud down there in the dark. I did. A girl of 17, laughing on a path at 11 o'clock at night, at a thing that had just done a piece of music better than she had. The last night of August was warm, and there was no moon to speak of. I came down the path, and I whistled my 4 bars, and I waited, and nothing came. I stood there a good while. I whistled it again, and I waited again, and there was nothing but the water going over the stones, and the frogs and the ordinary noise of a bottom in August. And I was disappointed. That is what I felt. Not relief, not fright. I was 17, and I was standing in the dark being disappointed in a way I did not have the words for and would not have for about 30 years. And then it whistled something else. Not my song. Something I had never heard in my life. 8 bars of it, or 10, I could not tell you now, and it was perfect. In tune, in time, the whole thing. Straight through, the first time. And there was a turn in the middle of it. A little run of notes that goes up and comes back down and lands somewhere you do not expect. That is not a thing a person does by accident. That is a thing a person has to practice. And I have played the piano badly for 80 years, and I know exactly how much practicing a turn like that takes. It finished, and the bottom went back to being a creek bottom, and I walked home, and it never came again. I have got nothing to show anybody. There is no photograph of it and no piece of it and nobody to say it happened but me. But I will tell you one more thing, and then I am finished. In 1968, I was standing in a kitchen in Fredericksburg with the radio on, doing something with my hands. Dishes, I expect. And a song came on that I had heard once before. I knew it inside of 3 notes. I knew the turn in the middle of it before it got there. And that song was not written until 1961. I have checked. I checked it in a library, and then I checked it again, years later, on a computer that my grandson set up for me, and it was written in 1961 by a man in California who was 11 years old in the summer of 1946. I married Carl in 1949. He was a good man, and he whistled worse than anybody I've ever met in my life. And he knew it. And he did it on purpose in the kitchen to get a rise out of me. 51 years of that. I never told him this either. It was not a secret exactly, it was just mine, and I'd kept it a long time before I ever met him, and I did not want to hand it over and watch somebody be kind about it. I told my granddaughter about 10 years ago. She was the first. She sat and she listened all the way through, and she did not say anything for a minute, and then she asked me if I was frightened, and I said no, and she said good, and that was the whole of it, and I have loved her more than is reasonable ever since. I am 97. I do not go out much now. My hips have their own opinions, and there is a chair by the window that has more or less become where I live. I still whistle the first 4 bars sometimes, at the sink mostly without deciding to. My hands are in the water and it comes out of me and I hear it and I stop. And then I wait about 4 bars. Not for anything. Not because I think there is anything. The way you hold a door open a second longer than you have to when there is nobody coming. And then I finish the dishes and I dry my hands and I go and sit down.